time.
Let's do it.
All right, call to order, 6:06. We're going to skip agenda item 1, if you don't have a quorum to approve minutes. Bob, do you have an update on the summer 2020 capital
Yes.
projects?
Steve, you want to give that just because you're out in the buildings and you see what they're doing more?
At Metcalf, they've got all the windows all painted, and they're going to be installing the sheetrock probably before the end of the week. They got it all cut supposedly at the shop, and they were just staining the trim because they brought the sample of trim in for me, and it was not dark enough, so I had them go back and restain it. So Metcalf, they should be done very shortly. I think they painted just about every window. And at Wawaloom, the breach is removed and the ductwork is completed. All the ductwork is completed. They replaced it and it's done. Now it's just waiting for the unit.
Excellent.
So, and the oil pumps, but that's not a big deal. But they did an excellent job. I'll tell you what, it's the neatest contractors. That place is cleaner than when they started at Wawaloom. And Martone is very neat. They're doing a very good job. I'm very pleased with them.
Good.
So.
Okay. Let's see. Is this where you're going to have to share your screen, Bob? Or
Yeah, I just do that for the
flow?
betterment of the core for people who don't. So are you seeing that?
I just see you.
There you go.
Yep.
So the part of the discussion, and it's really my words, but I think it captures the sentiment, is there is, since March 13th, people have gotten really conservative in their approach to making expenditures. And not that it's not about the need, it's just about, will people support it? Can we get the votes, et cetera? So with that in mind, in discussion at the school committee level and then some at the building committee level, certainly, it behooved me to start to look at, well, what happens if the $17.4 million projects that are to be supported through financing of a bond, if that vote were to fail. So I took a couple of runs at it with our friends up at RIDE, School Building Authority. And eventually what we came up with was the scenario that I'm showing. And so the first date is September 15th, 2020. And that would be the stage 2 submittal of the $17.4 million that would be supported by the bond. The RIDE SBA is suggesting at the same time submit a stage 1 application, and we've identified 9.5 million, and we being the superintendent, myself, input from Jeremy, Steve, and some of the other administrators, that's been shared at the school committee level, but not in the detail that it's going to be shared tonight. And that was in concert with Torado Architects. Just as a placekeeper, November 3rd is the 2020 election. And it's conceivable that EWG could put a vote on the bond at this time, but I don't know that we could do that.
I think the time's gone by to get it on the ballot at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've been on this for over a month now, so that's probably, we could scratch that. November 10th, 2020 is when the Council on Elementary and Secondary Education votes to approve projects. That's date is a little fluid, but that's the one that's posted on the RIDE website. in talking with RIDE, they said, yeah, it's there and that's what it would be, but there might be some movement on that. So if we submit on the 15th, stage 2, and everything goes as planned, on November 10th, we could have approval by the Council on Elementary and Secondary Ed for the 17.4 million in capital projects. The November 11th through February 11th, I'm picking the date after the council would vote, we would have that period of time to try and hold a special election for the bond referendum vote. Now, in discussing that timeline with our legal counsel, they're not so sure that we could get enabling legislation in place for the 17.4 million to be, enacted by through the legislation. That's a requirement by law. We're working on that currently, but again, part of their concern, if you talk to RIDE, there is this, they want projects to get done. And so that at pre-March 13th, there was this idea that they would try and get enabling legislation on between the first of the year and that February 15th, which is the next CC meeting for approval. But now we're being told that might not actually be happening given the new set of circumstances post March 13th, 2020. But let's assume that everything went as planned. A vote occurs on February 11th. The voters reject the bond and would move over to the red column. So somewhere between November 11th and February 11th, we get on the ballot. There's a vote. The vote is not supported by the voters, or the bond is not supported by the voters. It's rejected. The bond is rejected. On February 15th, which is the next middle date to RIDE, we would submit stage 2 application for the 9.5 million. Remembering that here we were submitting stage 1 in September, and then the next submittal would be in February. So we'd ask them, bond's been rejected, pull the request for the 17.4, submit on February 15th, the 9.5 million. In the 9.5 million, as you'll shortly see, is a subset of the same projects in the 17.4. So this timeline in this subset is consistent with what the school committee was asking, rather than try to do $17.4 million of one type of projects and then another amount of millions of dollars in another set of projects. It would start to get confusing to the electorate, so to the voters. So this February 15th, or this 9.5 million, is a direct subset of the 17.4 million. And that little nuance there was factored into the discussion with RIDE, because it kind of changed the flow of things. So let's say we get bond rejected, submit stage 2, April 12th, 2021 is the ADR. We would now no longer need the bond, and we would be requesting dollars for self-funding of capital projects. And the dollar request would be determined by what projects the school committee and the building committee want to proceed with, what kind of fund balances are available for the school committee to shift into the capital project reserve fund, and then the balance that would be a request at the all-day referendum in 2021. May 11th, CC would approve and issue an MOA for self-funding. And those are pretty straightforward. Nothing's pro forma, but it's pretty straightforward because we're not including bond counsel, any sort of other, parties involved in it. And then they approve, let's say they approve on May 11th, and EWG would continue working with Toronto and and his team to submit the stage 3 and the 4 application, and we'd be ready to go with projects probably in 2022.
Bob, I have some comments.
Sure.
Okay, so comment number one. What's the time frame on all this is horrible.
Yeah, I know.
Because you got, November 11th, I'm going back to the first portion here for the 17.4. November 11th through February 11th. You got Thanksgiving, followed by Christmas, followed by New Year's. You're into budget season starting December 1st. And, and then, by mid-February, you're heavy into budget season and everybody's paying attention. So the likelihood that you're going to be going down the red column, given that time frame, is pretty high.
I agree. I am working really hard not to voice my opinion here, because it's not my opinion that matters, so to speak, in this.
Well,
but I think you're spot on, Lee.
And I was wondering so my question then associated with that is what's the downside to what's the downside to either pushing the vote off a little bit, or it would be really good if we could get it onto the November ballot, but I don't think that's possible.
No, in talking with Andrew today, he does not see that, because we need bond counsel and.
All right. So then my next question. All right. So let's assume we're going down the red column for a minute, which is going to suck. So now we're talking about 9.5 million. And again, we've got this little timing issue because they've just rejected 17.4 million. We complete budget season. Then we go right into the April ADR. And they say, yeah, guess what? We don't agree with that either. And let's just say by chance they do agree with it. Because we got to spend some money. The place is going to fall down. Let's just say by chance they do agree with it. All right. So now we're looking at $9.6 million, I think, is the total.
Right.
So roughly round numbers, 9.6. So we have to do $4.8 million to meet the requirement. So what are we going to have, given our current situation, for money to kick this off, self-funding, knowing full well we got to get this done in 5 years? Our reserves are going to be depleted by the end of this year, if all goes as planned. Where is the startup money going to come from?
Right. I think that's.
I don't see how we can self-fund.
Yeah, so there's two concepts there. The one is the self-fund is truly the capital request that the ADR is fulfilled and met, right? So it's fully funded as a ADR kind of functionality. The other part of the self-funding, which we've done in the past 5 years, is we've used, fund balance to do it. So we didn't really even have to ask for a request ever at the ADR.
No, I understand that. And that's what I'm getting at is, our fund balance is going to be depleted. We know that. We'll be lucky to survive this year based on the budget. This district's not getting any healthier. So the insurance costs are bearing that out. So, you know, I'm just sitting here looking at it saying how, I mean, to get a $5 million, let's call it 4.8, to get 4.8 million off the ground and be able to get us all the way through the 5 years, we got to essentially come up with about $2 million up front to get it kicked off, right?
Yeah, it could be that much to get it going in the schedule of projects. It looks like, you know, the first year is a little richer than that, but there's room for that. But to go back to your funding, I mean, you're aware of all the different funds that we have available to us, and the big one is the general fund balance. And right now, while it's showing a good fund balance as a reflection of the costs we avoided from March to June, we're incurring a whole bunch of different costs going forward.
Right. I mean,
You
based
know.
upon the projections that I saw, not last night, but in the prior meeting 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
you're going to be down to next to nothing.
The wild card is the state funding.
Right.
You
And
know, we do not know what that's going to look like.
well, the geniuses up on Capitol Hill have not figured out how to stop the flow of money out of the coffers yet. So that's not getting any better.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that even if I'm just concerned, we know we've got to do at least the $5 million. We absolutely know we've got to do that. And what I'm wondering is, you know, I don't see us being able to self-fund it. And I'm wondering, you know, if we did self-fund it, would we even have to put it on? It wouldn't even have to be a ballot question, really, right?
Nope, it wouldn't.
So that saves us that. But at the same time, if we don't have the money, would we be better off asking for something at least to kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that, so let me go to, so the screen that I just shared, and this is just, you know, I'm working with the 9.5 million number, and I'm just trying to feather out over 5 years, where would we do projects? So in FY 2022, the 2.8 million represents the HVAC. In 2023, the 4 million represents the HVAC in some of the science lab and the greenhouse upgrade, because we start to run up against the incentives in FY 23, correct, Lou?
I believe the incentives for educational enhancements stop at the end of 22. So
Yes.
that means you have to be under contract with a contractor before the end of 20. 23 is reduction in overcrowding, but enhancements is 22.
Yeah, the hits keep on coming.
I just want to see something here. Hold on.
So, Bob, let me ask another question. Just given the fact that you're going to get reimbursement from the housing, forget about the enhancements. So if we plan on doing 9.5 million and we have enough money to kick it off up front, which is looking like, let's call it 3 million. Are we still looking at what, 61% or something like that?
Yeah, we'd probably be
More than that.
higher than that. 61 is our minimum.
Well, but I'm assuming that I'm making that assumption based upon the time frame, not whether we're going to be higher or not. I'm just thinking that by the time this all gets done, I mean, let's face it. I mean, it's going to be tight to get all this stuff under contract by that amount of time. But
Yeah,
let's just say it's 61%. Let's say it's 65%. So we get $3 million going in 2021. 65% of that is what coming back in 2022?
what was your number, Lee? What was your base number?
I just used 3 million to make the math easy. So
Yeah, so what's that, like, 1.8 million?
yeah, 1.95, I think.
Okay,
So we got 1.95 million. So then, so with 1.95, that only represents half the 4.243.
right.
And if we, and so if we did the 4.243 in year 2, and which I'm assuming is the HVAC,
That's HVAC and science.
it would almost make sense to do HVAC and science up front, and then the payback would carry us through the rest of the projects.
Yeah, I mean, there's, like I said,
But it means we're asking for 4 million up front.
yeah.
I have a question. On the last half where you're counting on the payback money, are the enhancements based on school population a factor?
Only if it's overcrowding.
Yeah, no, the only project that was going to be eligible for that was when we built an addition to our loom, because that decreased the overcrowding at Metcalf. And that's not in any of these projects now.
Correct.
So it's not a factor.
No.
Okay.
So anyway, just looking at everything, Bob, I think we've got to really focus on HVAC up front. We're probably going to have to ask for, if not all of the 4.243, a big chunk of it, because I don't think we're going to have anything to kick it all off with. And then if we get that, we'll be able to get through the whole 9.5. I recognize all we have to do is half of that to meet the requirement, but the bottom line is there's nothing in that list that doesn't have to be done at 9.5 million.
Right.
There's nothing in the list at 17.4 million that doesn't have to be done.
Yeah, it's a dilemma. There is also, I'll just put it out there just because it's full disclosure and you probably know it, but I'll restate it. We could certainly, there's nothing that prevents the district from self-funding for the next 2 years, even though the MOA would be 5, and then saying, okay, we're ready to do something different. You at any point during an MOA, you can say we're going out for a bond. There's nothing that stops the district from doing that.
Except the taxpayers.
Right. And I think that's the dilemma. Like maybe in 3 years, 4 years, there's the world's in a different place and people are like, okay, we're ready to make that investment. But
Bob, I thought that when you switched and did a bond independently of the MOA, unless you got a new MOA, they didn't pay you back on the interest.
You would be going for a new MOA.
Okay, so you're saying it would just be a whole new thing.
If you do a self-fund and then you at some point jump off and say, we want to do a new MOA under a bond, they'll let you do that. But
Okay.
you have to go through the whole process. 1, 2, 3, 4.
What am I missing with the self-funding thing, though? Because I don't get, if the funds end up being depleted and state aid doesn't come through, I'm confused how we could kick it off.
You can't. That's my point.
I mean, you can't. I mean, I know you said like ask for it at the all-day referendum, but you really can't. Like the towns aren't going to just add $4 million to the budget like that, put them over their tax cap.
No,
So
so
we'd have to ask for it in the ADR. We would have to make a conscientious decision that we file the secondary MOA not under the self-funding guise, but under the we're going to have to float a bond up front for a minimum of whatever that number is, probably the 4.243 mil. And, and then the remainder would be self-funded, I think, because of let's call it the 65%, just to make life easy. You get enough back in year one, in year two to cover year two's cost, and then year two's kickback would cover year three, and then year three's would almost cover year four, and year four's kickback would almost cover year five. We'd have to start preparing to self-fund some of it by 2025 and 2026 to cover the difference, but it wouldn't be, we'd be talking a couple of $100,000. It wouldn't be a killer.
Right, but ride's so inflexible that, we can't just switch back and forth. Like, we'd have to plan on a smaller bond.
If I could interject, so at the ADR in 2021, if it was self-funded and it wasn't going to be kickstarted with the bond, which I haven't really thought about that, but I need to synthesize that a little bit. But at the ADR, the capital request is a separate resolution. So the
Correct.
Capital request, the reason it's a separate resolution is because it does not become part of the MOE and the functionality of the operations. So you're at the ADR, it's a vote on the capital request to do these things. And then it's the operations to run the district. It's two resolutions.
Well, yeah, I understand it might be two separate questions, but the bottom line is the towns aren't going to be able to increase the taxes enough to fund that.
Yeah.
I say something for a minute.
Yeah.
There is another avenue that we've done with other districts. We're currently doing it with two.
James.
And that is a lease program where you can structure the lease to be paid over 5-10 years, whatever that is. And then you spread out those payments. Those leases are not typically approved, have to be approved by voters. The downside is that RIDE doesn't reimburse on the interest payment. They reimburse you on the payment for the principal, but not on the interest payment of it.
Yeah, and even if we floated a bond, James, and we got the taxpayers to approve, it would be over, let's say it's over a 20-year period. The taxpayers could afford that over a 20-year period.
Oh, no, I understand that. I'm saying they can't afford to jumpstart it without the bond.
Right. We would, in my opinion, the only way we're going to get this done is we're going to have to float some sort of a bond up front. The taxpayer certainly could afford the bill over 20 years or 15 years, whatever we structured and I'm dead set against leases. That's a waste of money. I'm all for floating a bond and paying the interest on a bond because of the reimbursement. But and then the housing aid would offset the follow-on years pretty much for the most part. So, we can get that $9.5 million done if we float a bond up front. But if we choose to go totally self-funded, ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
So what we really need is a plan that mixes these two.
Yes.
So just, I need to respond to Andrew tomorrow. And is it the will to continue to try and issue some amount of a bond to get this going, right?
Yeah.
I don't see any other way, Bob.
So I think that the number of the dollar value of the bond is irrelevant to the process, which is back in in here, trying to get this kind of activity happening here, so that we can get the bond, the enabling legislation, and get it on the referendum.
I mean, we're either floating a $17.4 million bond to the taxpayers, which probably won't fly, or we're floating a $4 million bond to the taxpayers, which might fly if they understand the severity of the situation. The problem is they don't understand the severity of the situation.
I agree. I think that's good. That's got to get out there.
Bob, what were you saying about, I forget his name, that you said they didn't think it was likely that they could even get enabling legislation by February 10th?
That was the district legal counsel. He was talking with someone up at Hvac. I mean, I wouldn't get panicked on that. I will definitely nail down that timeline and report that back to the committee, to both committees, and really try and the
enabling legislation, James, is more boilerplate. Once if the taxpayers approve the bond, that's the big hurdle. Getting the legislature to do what they need to do, that can happen anytime before we put a shovel in the ground.
Yeah. So Oh,
I misunderstood. I thought it had to happen to even have the bond referendum. Never mind.
Yeah, no, that's right. You
that
need
is right. It happens.
legislation to have a voter approval. So.
Okay, so it is a problem then.
And I would add this, there's another layer. So right now, the stage 2 submittal has the town approval of going forward with this process. The enabling legislation requires the school committee and the towns to approve the dollar value of the bond.
Okay, well, all that means is we have to decide if it's 17 or 4. We can't go back and forth.
Right. No, I agree. I just it's a difference of saying, yeah, go forward and do this thing. We support that. Now we've done this thing. We're saying, okay, now you need to write the letter supporting $17.4 million worth of bond, or 17.4 million of funding through a bond, and that becomes enabling legislation. And we've got to get a pulse. If it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm all for that, and it's another thing to say, now I'm committing to it.
Okay, I misunderstood that too.
So the approval right now that we have in the stage 2 simply says the towns agree to go forward with, looking at the $17.4 million worth of project and developing that. The enabling legislation, as I understand that it was explained to me, will now require a formal vote by the school committee to say we support issuance of a $17.4 million bond, in the same action by West Greenwich and the same action by Exeter town councils. So in one instance, they're saying, yeah, go forward and explore this. We've now explored it. Now we're asking you to say you want us to go to bond for the 17.4.
Bob.
Yeah.
What does the letter say that's going to go with the stage 2 submittal from the towns?
Give me 1 second.
Yeah, read that to me, because I want to know what that says.
So this is March 11th.
So they voted to 5-0 to approve the bond request. So I would say, and if Exeter says the same thing.
Let me pull theirs up.
Okay, so they both say they voted to approve the bond request. The school committee's already voted to approve the bond request. Why don't we have enabling legislation on its way right now and get the vote prepared? And it's to me, based upon those two letters, it's up to the taxpayers at this point. Enabling legislation can go.
I'm gonna share that with them. That was not the conversation that I had today, but in reading this, it looks like, this, it pretty much bluntly says it.
That's right. So not to belabor things, but I think we are ready to rock as far as enabling legislation based on those letters, and then it's up to the taxpayers. Now, if the taxpayers say no, and it's highly likely they will, given the current environment, then we have to be prepared to go down the other road. But they have to understand the severity of the situation, and I think they've got to be prepared at a minimum to float a $5 million bond, to support that. Because otherwise, we're gonna have some big problems.
So the stage one that gets submitted in September with our stage two is going to be a second bond with a lesser amount instead of self-financed.
Well, up until this evening, it was all self-financed, but I don't know that it matters. I really think this discussion shows that, I'm texting the district legal counsel as we're doing this. I think I'm in agreement that we have in hand the town approval to go forward with the enabling legislation and to put it on the ballot and let the voters decide.
And that's what I thought those letters said. I just couldn't remember for sure. That's why I was confused by why is this being brought up?
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think what we're looking at is Plan B in case this doesn't fly with the voters.
Correct. And given the environment, I think that it's highly likely it's not going to fly.
So going back to, where is it?
That and the timing. I think if the timing were different, I think the voters might approve it. But right now with the recent memory, and I've been out talking to the folks in the towns because of the, I'm hoping to be on a town council come December. But talking to the people, there's a lot of angst about the school district budget in the town, and that letter had very little to do with it. Right. The letter that went out by the town council. Most people were uptight anyway. And I'm not talking just families within the district. I'm talking people who have kids in the district and people who are the kids along out of the district. But you talk to the people in the town, and it's heavy in this town anyway. It's heavily against the school district right now as far as funding.
So with that in mind, I know we hit it already, but just so I have clarity, let's assume stage two gets in September. And stage one goes in September. We may have to, Lou, what would that change? Or I'll have to talk to Ryan, I guess. The 9.5 million. Now it's not just, it's self-funded, but we're going to issue a bond too.
I don't think that will make a difference. We have districts where they've done both. They have a bond for a portion of it, and the rest is self-funded. The tricky part, though, is I think you're saying that you're going to be asking us to prepare another stage two without knowing if the first $17 million project has failed. Because if we need to submit that new stage two by February, you may not know unless you get the enabling legislation for November if that has passed or not.
Right, which brings me back to that, and that's where I was kind of going, Lou. So let's just say, coming out of this meeting, the building committee and the letters from the towns demonstrate that we have the support for the bond referendum, get the enabling legislation done, because we want to get on the ballot for,
November would be preferable, but
yeah.
because
Could
if
it,
we could
There-
get on
there
the
are-
if we could get on the ballot in November, we'd stand a real good chance of getting it approved.
Well, there are districts, a number of them, that are seeking enabling legislation in September. That's one of the reasons why the House is coming back, is to address those projects.
so let's do it.
And they're all for the November election. The one thing that I just want to point out, we're gonna, if we go in November, we're gonna go to the voters without right approval, because that won't happen till later on in November.
But that's fine. It can be contingent upon right approval. That's what's happened in other districts.
Yeah, and by then we'll have a really good idea whether it's gonna be approved or not.
Correct.
I don't,
Sounds like you got the plan.
Hey, Bob, I
Yes,
just had a
yes.
thought.
yes.
So, do we need a stage one, another one anymore? Because if we have the 17 point whatever, and they reject that, and we want to do 9.5, well, 9.5 is more than half of 17.4. So couldn't we just
It's a sub-
downsize and do 9.5 on the same MOA?
It's a subset of it too.
Yeah, like it's all the same projects. We're just going to do a smaller bond and do only half.
It makes logical sense to me.
Also, it's definitely not going to fly then.
Yeah. I will never go for that.
And it gets back to previous conversations. We have to have a backup plan because we have to do something. The issue with the second plan is, one, we can't confuse the voters, and two, I think if you look at the 9.5, it's going to be, one of the other questions we got to ask of the 9.5, if we go just the housing aid, I think on the bigger bond, we don't see reimbursement until everything's done. On the 9.5, if we do piecemeal and we float a bond for, will we be able to get the revenue stream, Bob, for the follow-on projects to self-fund the follow-on projects? Or are we going to have to float the whole 9.5?
So I just put up,
That's where they've clipped our wings on the bigger bond.
yeah, this is the, this is old, this is from PCM, the bond, the state aid would start coming in 26 under this scenario.
Right.
This had bands, I think, I don't have,
Yeah, because I on the bigger bond, I remember that you and everyone else saying that, you're not going to get reimbursement until you're 100% done. Then the reimbursement comes later. And, if we take that approach on the smaller bond, we're done. We're dead in the water unless we ask for the 9.5 million. Which is probably why you guys were thinking self-funding, but that's dead in the water out of the starting gate because we got no money. Oh, the timing of all this sucks. 2020 has just been a horrible year.
Well, my backup plan is a lot of chewing gum and duct tape.
Yeah, I don't envy you, Steve.
Maybe some Lexanite.
That Gorilla Tape works pretty good.
Yeah, we've got that.
excuse me. So if we're, so let me, just so that I have some takeaways, work tomorrow, first thing, get clarity about enabling legislation and the desire to get on the November 3rd bond referendum, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Then we want to, now we're down to this area here. Voters approve, we're fine.
Yep.
Voters don't approve. Do we need to answer that right now, or do we just?
Right.
I think you should get some clarity on whether or not we need to submit a stage one because of what Lee just said about, you know, the whole, do we need a $5 million bond or a $10 million bond? So we know what we're doing.
Yeah, I think you need clarity there from Ride on how that's going to function if they reject the bigger one, how do we afford the other one? And we have to do it. Can we get reimbursement from in housing aid year over year as soon as we start? That's the question.
As long as we have an MOA, yes. Because that's what the MOA is. The MOA is an agreement that you're going to do these projects over 5 years, and RIDE is going to reimburse you at the base rate and plus any eligible incentives.
But that's fine, but
Yeah,
that's
but
not how it works on the 17.4. On the 17.4, it says we're going to do all of those projects over 5 years, and at the end of 5 years, we're going to start reimbursing you.
No.
And well, the way RIDE explained it, however long ago, was when you use a bond, they pay you, like they pay the bond payments and the interest. You don't
Right.
get 65% of the project back. Like they pay it out over 15 or 20 years. So that doesn't help us kickstart self-funding for the following years.
Right.
So it's almost like if we have to self-fund, we have to do a bond without RIDE reimbursement.
Yeah, and we got no money.
If we go to bond, just disregard, you know, this was with bands to roll into the project. But once you're through the bands and the bond is issued in 2020, you're like the year you issue the bond, it's the principal, the interest. That's RIDE. This is our housing aid.
Right. So that's kicked back.
So that comes,
Right,
that comes like year one of your bond payment.
All right. So if we
Right, but that's not going to help for rolling it forward like a self-finance.
Well, it does, and here's how that works, James. So we want to do $9.5 million. So let's say we ask for 5 million, and the minimum back is 60% to make the math easy. So if we issue a bond for $5 million, we do the $5 million in year one. At the following year, they'll give us a check back in housing aid for $3 million. So that means we now have $3 million for the next year to spend on capital.
So you're saying to do a ban and that's it?
No,
Or
bond.
No.
Right out of
yeah,
the
but they won't give you $3 million back on the bond. They'll pay the 65% of your year one bond payment.
Right.
No, I don't think so. I think that comes back in housing aid direct to the school district.
No, this would be what you're looking at on the screen. I hope you can see it, you know, disregard the bands, you know, PI, state aid, net.
Right. So state aid would come back to the district, correct, Bob?
Correct.
All
Right, but that's principal and interest for year one
Right,
of
exactly.
a very large bond. So if it's only a $5 million bond, it's only going to be the principal and interest paid off that year.
Well, this represents like 66% of the P and I.
James, the principal and interest is going to be the responsibility of the taxpayers in the towns. The state aid will come back to the school district. That money will be designated for capital projects because it has to be. And then we'll be able to use that money for the following year's capital projects. So now
He
we
wants
have
to quote a
$3
bond
million
directly for
to-
$5 million. He doesn't want the state to pay it back. He wants the taxpayers to pay it back to jumpstart.
So we're not going to get reimbursed on the interest for the bond for the $5 million. That's what I said earlier.
I'm not fault. That was all, that didn't come through clear for me.
What you're looking at on this spreadsheet,
Yep.
the principal, interest, state aid, net debt service, this is on whatever, what size bond is this? 17.8,
17.8.
whatever.
And then we had the ratio of 61 with the bonus of 66.
Right, but what I'm saying is the state aid payment of $691 on a $17 million bond in year one, like that's all it is. So if it was a $5 million bond, that state aid payment would only be, a couple $100,000.
I think the way we're all saying, we're kind of saying the same thing in a variance. This is what you would get. This would be the outlay here, the 520 and the 620, right? Here's the reimbursement. This is what we need to ask for the taxpayers to fund, 449, 589. And you can see over time what they do in this model. They're keeping the taxpayer.
Yeah, I understand the math and what the sheet's saying. I'm saying we're not going to get $3 million back.
Correct. If we do a bond schedule, correct.
The only way we'll get that much back is if it's self-funded. So we would have to issue a bond independent of RIDE and not get any money back for interest.
Correct. A different financing mechanism.
Right, which is,
Which
I'm
is
just reverting
essentially,
back to the financing mechanism we had in the past.
which essentially is this. You're just, the bands are just saying,
No, the bands confuse it, Bob. That's not at all.
no, I understand, but I know what you're saying, but you look at it, you're just,
What they're doing in this model, James, is they're spreading the housing aid reimbursement over the 20-year life of the loan.
Yes.
If we spend $3 million in year one, and the MOA says your housing aid reimbursements, $5 million in year one, and your housing aid reimbursement is 60%, in year two, you'll get a check back from the state for $3 million because you spent $5 million in year one.
under self-funded, yes,
Yeah, under self-funded, not under a bond project.
correct. Under your scenario, Lee, they have and I don't even know, I think it might have expired, but they call it the Sba Fast Track, and it's up to 500,000. So you can like do a project like, if you wanted to do, say, this finished flooring for 243 and you had the cash on hand, do it, they'll reimburse you up to $500,000 projects. But we're going a little bit adrift here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what you're
I was
saying
just trying to
then
get.
so what you're saying then is they're going to do on a bond the same thing they're doing on this, which isn't really going to help us much. So basically,
we could
which gets
do
me
it.
back to my previous statement. Then we would, if we're not floating 17.4, we're floating 9.5, and we're taking it over 20 years.
Yes, the alternative would be to float a $5 million bond independent of RIDE and not get reimbursed on the interest. And I'd have to do the math to figure out which one of those two would be preferable.
No. You'd have to float a $9.5 million bond.
No, I'm saying there's two options. You can float a $9.5 million bond and do the whole bond reimbursement schedule, just like RIDE wants to do, and we get reimbursed slowly. Or EWG just borrows $5 million independent of RIDE and uses it in a self-funded MOA. So you get the money back. So it requires less of a bond, but over time, we have to pay all the interest ourselves and we don't get reimbursed on it. And I don't know which scenario is more financially beneficial.
I don't no, I can tell you, I don't think there's anything independent of RIDE when it comes to borrowing money for a school district, the way they've structured things.
Yeah, that's correct. I was just in a meeting with Hvac this week where there's the state law says any school financing needs to be done through Hvac.
That's what I
Oh,
thought.
I didn't mean like outside of Ryback. I just meant as a self-funded project. And they may not even let you do it, but yes. So if you're right, then we're back to it's a $9.5 million bond, end of story.
Right. Oh, well, so much for taking a ride in the Mustang with the top down tonight. Well, Bob, I guess what you got to do tomorrow is you got to get the enabling legislation kicked off. You got to get us on the November ballot, and then, pending approval of stage 2 and the voters saying, yes, we're good to go. Otherwise, I think we're going down a path of a $9.5 million stage 1 submittal and bond.
Which may not be necessary because it's less than half, so it might be okay. Bob would have to ask.
Right.
Okay, I just want to be clear on our direction. We are proceeding to submit the stage 2 for 17-4 in September, and we're also submitting a stage 1.
I think there's a question mark on stage 1, but definitely on stage 2 and definitely on getting on the ballot as soon as possible.
It's just if you stop us for any period of time, it's going to be hard for us to meet the deadline for the stage 1.
For September.
That's right. We're just talking 2 weeks away.
Right.
No, I understand. I mean, you guys have to do what you have to do. I'm just saying that if we're going to have to bond for 9.5, I don't know the answer to that question. Like, do we actually need another stage 1 if it's going to be a bond project, just like the 17.4?
Why would RIDE have required us to do the stage 1?
Right.
Because it was going to be self-funded.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I would be willing to bet that they're going to say
You need to have.
you're going to need stage 1 on. So for the 9.5 or the whatever we decide that bond numbers, the alternate bond number is going to be, you're going to need a stage 1. Because
Okay.
when you look at this, when you look at the flow, at this point here, RIDE is saying they know the votes have occurred, and they're going to say, did it or did it not pass? If it, and I wrote, EWG, we request RIDE to pull the approval, but basically the no vote nullifies it. So then our option would be, to proceed February 15th and submit the stage 2 for 9.5 million, and in exchange this with, instead of self-funded, it would be bond and self-funded, or bond, or in the bond amount of 5 million, balance self-funded.
and then have voter approval for that sometime in the spring.
Right, then that goes to April, and then it just follows.
Yeah.
But because as much as we don't, excuse me, as much as we don't like it, they have a boss. And they're like, I mean, to get to this workflow took like,
10 minutes.
I can't even tell you, 2 weeks of negotiation with them. Because this is not typical.
Right, because they don't like the whole idea of mixing the self-funding and the bond and having the same project appear twice on different things. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is, since it's the same projects, it's a complete subset, they're both bonds, it's almost identical, and we're above the 50% threshold, I think it's worth asking the question, because not only are we saving the stage 1 process, it kicks everything back months of time.
And cost.
I mean, if the answer is no, the answer is no. I'm just saying it seems
Yeah.
like it's worth asking.
Oh, no, we'll definitely ask. I mean, that's not an issue. But I think it's not a but. It's just clarity of
Well, I
what's,
think if the answer is no, then we have to proceed with the plan you have laid out here.
Yes, absolutely.
okay, so then it brings us back to what is this on this date? And forgive me if I'm being redundant, but we're covering a lot of ground. So on September 15th, we know the stage 2 is going. Is this going?
It's
You know,
going if they won't accept it as a subset of our stage 2 submittal. That's the question you need to ask. If
I
they
did, and this was
no, then it has to go, and we have
Right.
to pay for it, and we have to be prepared to send it.
in on the 9.5, is it
It's
self
bonded.
is it self-funded or is it
Can't be.
The only way you could make the 9.5 work self-funded is if the towns agreed to pony up $300,000 apiece for the next 5 years on top of the unfunded liability we have right now.
so then
Well, actually, it's worse than that, because to do it, we'd have to find $5 million, and it would have to be money we have that we didn't have to go and finance because we can't go through RIDE to get it. So unless there's $5 million kicking around somewhere, we're dead in the water as far as self-funding is concerned.
so then it's 9.5 because it matters because we're creating documents that we're going to submit. So right now I'm working with Lou and his team and we're going along a stage 1 9.5 self-funded. Now we're pivoting to a stage 1 9.5 supported through the issuance of bonds.
Correct. Don't have a choice. Like I said, Bob, unless
No, I get it. I totally get it.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, one more year like this year, next year, and we might be filing under Chapter 11.
It is a dire situation, isn't it? We're between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, all of us.
Yeah.
Yep.
Answer me something, Frank. You being part of the town council in Exeter, how does Gina Raimondo get to go and spend $2 billion of federal aid unaccounted for?
Good question. I don't have an answer.
Yeah. No. Crazy. Okay, so on item 3 of the 7-point item agenda, I'm going to pursue the enabling legislation for the 17.4, arguing that we have the vote of the school committee and the towns in hand, the support and the vote of the 17.4. The continue to verify the stage 1 9.5 supported by a bond. I think that's just verbiage here. They don't care how it's supported. They just know that under their process, stage 2, the backup plan, submit stage 1. And then we'll just continue on that path. In the 9.5 I don't think it matters to the narrative because I've worked with Jim and Lou and have typed it up for the stage 1 submittal, but it included the roof at Wawaloon, the HVAC, and then the greenhouse foundation and the science lab, which is part of the CTE, the educational enhancements, which we'll get money for.
What about the roof at Metcalf?
Pardon?
Roof at Metcalf, no?
Yes, that's on there.
Yeah.
No, it's what's highlighted in blue.
Oh,
Now, just keep in mind, if we get this, assume this gets approved,
okay.
we can certainly lobby RIDE through a process to do any of these other projects with available funding? Should these come in less expensive? Should they come in, we reprioritize due to an event? You know, they're not, you know, they're not going to be, they're going to allow us to move that. And it's called the certification of emergency, and it's a process. But you can see, I mean, we are so close to this number. You know, the 17.5 and the 9.5, I mean, it's
$8 million away apart. That's it.
yeah, it's a roof at Metcalf and then a bunch of little stuff. But a roof at Metcalf is yielding a $2 million spend. That could be a game changer when you're trying to say, can we have 17? No. Can we have 11.5? No. Then we're SOL.
Okay.
You know how we get that roof at Metcalf, Bob? We get that roof at Metcalf by putting on a solar system over there.
I don't disagree.
I agree. That would work. I'd go for that.
Talk to Grid.
They'd do the roof for nothing to put the solar up there, and we could do that pretty much like we just did the other project. I don't know that we just have to get RIDE to say yes or no, right?
Right.
Because that would be the leasing thing.
Yeah. So
So
Okay.
you got the direction you need, Bob?
yeah, I got it. Steve was taking notes.
So
Yeah, I got it all right here.
do you think the taxpayers will go for, you know, a 4 or $5 million bond over an $8 million bond?
I think I don't think the taxpayers understand the dire circumstances that the school is under right now. You know, you drive by the place, it looks pretty, it's well cared for. You know, it's not like Providence school systems where they're falling apart and they wind up on the front page of a newspaper and everybody gets in a tizzy.
Yeah, not to mention how many people don't realize what things actually cost.
Correct.
Yeah, that too.
That too. Tell them to drive by after a windstorm through the parking lot of Metcalf. They'll see half the roof on the ground.
Well, and not only that, you know, it's just part of the madness that we're in. But Steve, what was how many pages was the HVAC guidance that you downloaded from RIDE today?
30?
Yeah, so we have a 30-page guidance from the DOH and RIDE about HVAC systems and what we need to do.
You know,
in
the
order to
general
be ready
maintenance
for
thing, but
September.
mostly
the
HVAC.
Department of Health is running things now.
Oh, Lee, you don't even.
You have no
you don't
idea.
even wanna
They
know.
got to come in and check what the air exchanges are in every room. So I have to, you know, do the basic CFM times length times width to get the air exchanges per hour. I got to do it for
You
like.
got to calculate your duct flows, your duct sizes.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, which are very consistent throughout the junior.
They're not the same anywhere. Is this, you know, I couldn't tell you how many different air handlers we have here.
I only bring it up in that, you know, the conversation is people don't understand the dire, but the community is going to be like, HVAC is going to like, maybe I'm I hope it doesn't, but it's got all the markings of becoming a hot button topic real quick.
So we have 0.05% deaths in the United States due to COVID-19. We've destroyed our economy. We've shut the place down for 3 or 4 months. We're all struggling. The Department of Health is now running things. The governor's a dictator. Our constitutional rights are out the window for 0.05% of our population who has died at this point in time due to COVID. And the numbers have been mixed up so that it's maybe or maybe not really all due to COVID-19. Wow. How do we get this far south? Really?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
The world we're living in, right? Who'd have thunk?
I
So
can tell you,
anyway.
our air filtration system is way better than most of the schools in the state. I talked to the directors of places and they were like, filters? What filters? We change our filters more than anybody.
Shh, you don't want to hit the taxpayers to hear that. Ours is better than everybody else's, because, you know, then they won't want to give you.
I'm just saying, I'm not saying they're good. I'm saying it's better than going to a Providence school where they don't work at all.
Well, that's why Providence is getting all the money.
Yeah. But we're going to end up like that soon enough.
Well, yeah, unless we can get this fixed. That's what I mean. I think we really need to let the taxpayers know what kind of conditions we're in.
The new term that you're going to hear is de-densify.
The what?
De-densify. Telling you.
Is that like social distancing?
It's the HVAC equivalent of social distancing. De-densify a room. Okay.
Well, you shouldn't need as many air changes per hour if you only got half the people in the room.
Believe me, that was brought up.
Plus, I have to make the isolation rooms negative air pressure.
You got to do what?
The isolation rooms have
Oh
to be negative.
God.
They have to be negative.
So how are people going to open doors without getting smacked?
I can't make those rooms negative air pressure fully anyway. I mean, they're not designed that way.
There's a
Have to be
factory
negative
in
pressure rooms
Wesley.
like a hospital isolation room.
You can't in the winter months. You can't even open the doors. It takes 3 people to
Yeah, we turn the
latch
fans
onto
on
the
the
door to
windows
get
in
the
the
door
winter.
open.
I'm just telling you what they're asking.
Well, they don't know.
Won't be able to open the door if I get it to work.
Have to install automatic doors.
Yeah, they won't work well either. I mean, I'm not kidding you. I worked for a company in Westerly, and they had what were called electrostatic precipitators up on the roof. They had to exhaust so many cubic feet per minute through these things and to clean the air from the factory. And the amount of air being exhausted was more than could leak into the building. So you had a negative air situation, and what a nightmare it was getting in and out of there when in the wintertime when the doors and windows were shut. Summer, spring, fall didn't matter, but in the winter,
So that's a brief summary of our hour-and-a-half long discussion. Fast track enabling ledge to get on November 3rd, 2020 ballot. That's the 17.4 million. In the stage 1, change from self-funded to funded through bond.
I think that's the consensus.
Okay.
I think one thing you might want to add is the fact that before the referendum goes out is that we make the public aware of the gravity of the situation.
Yeah.
To try and make sure that we get a positive
Right.
voter turnout and response.
Right.
I think it's critical.
I agree with you, Frank.
We have to do these things. We have to come up with that money. We have to work with RIDE. We have no choice with all those things.
Right.
The only thing that we probably can have some impact on, hopefully, is to convince the voters of the necessity of this situation. We can do that. That is within the possibility of us accomplishing. We got to make an effort in that direction. I think definitely.
Yeah, I don't think, because we're not going to get bailed out like Providence.
No.
You know, if we wind up on the front page of the newspaper, they're going to look at us and say, "Well, you're wealthy. Figure it out on your own."
In working with the bond council, do we want to look at right out of the gate paying, or are we interested in a ban kind of scenario?
I think that band really confused the issue when we're talking about it with town councils and stuff. If you can avoid it, I would.
Especially since we
You
don't
gotta
get that
remember,
interest money back, and it's a much smaller project.
Okay, will do.
We started out at 95 million. We're down to 17.5 million. I think we've done everything we can, and I think it's pretty average. It's a big drop from what we originally started with.
It's just too bad the voters don't know the first number, because if they seen the higher numbers of what we cut already, they would realize what we, knocked off of the list. But I think they're going to be inclined to vote no on the first one.
You know what the sin of the whole situation is? Had we gone with the higher number and the right number was the $70 million figure, the taxpayers wouldn't be paying back much more over 20 years to have $70 million worth of improvements.
Yep. That's right.
That's the sin of the situation.
Yeah.
Yep.
We got a little, anyway. I'm looking at this. I'm revising documents for stage one. One of the documents we initially crafted August 14th, 2018. That's how long we've been beating this dog. That's a long time. And we've lost some opportunity, unfortunately. Nobody's fault. It's just it's the way it played out. But I agree with you, Lee. 70 million was probably the right number but it just didn't happen.
But a hard one to sell.
Yeah,
obviously.
Actually, if from what I heard from some folks, if we'd come to the table with 70 million first and not the 95, it would have probably gone through.
Yeah.
At least in West Greenwich, it would have. The 95 million really that pissed them right off.
So under the 17.4, this is just some of the parking lot detected with Lou at the high school. I think it looks really sharp. Shows the new greenhouse where the new parking would be. It gives it a much more controlled feel, I think, as opposed to now. And then I think this was.
Well, it isn't going to do any good to look back now. We got to move forward.
Right. All right. Oop.
Let's get her done.
All right. I think that also covered the next few items on the agenda, Bob.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
It did.
Do we need to set a date tonight?
I would prefer to, simply because
Okay.
it's just
The calendar. Where is my calendar? Is there any reason we need to meet again before the submittal, which is the 15th, which is only in 2 weeks?
Probably gonna have some invoices coming due.
Yeah, I don't. That's up to the committee.
But aren't we gonna have invoices coming due, Bob, for
Nothing substantial. I really don't.
boiler and the classroom?
I think by the second week in September, Martone will be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think I don't think ATC is going to invoice. I'm just getting their. I haven't gotten any invoices from them.
No, you won't get them till they're not going to be completed for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, then.
Martone's the only one that's possible.
I got a couple
Do
of
you want to
small.
push it out a month then? I mean, I have no preference. So I'll do it sooner. It's just not if there's not a reason to.
I don't think there'll be any major invoices.
16th or the 23rd or the 30th?
I'm available all three. I just, like I said, I don't know when we need to meet.
I think the 23rd, because I'm going to be real busy for a while.
23rd it
Sounds
is.
on the 23rd.
All right.
23rd,
23rd.
Sounds good.
done. Good.
The red represents the meetings minute. You want to approve them now?
You don't have a quorum.
Oh, rats. All right, guys.
Have a good night.
Good night.
See you guys.
All right.
Thanks,
Take care, guys.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody, for attending. It's important.
Over and out.